realize it was. So we're starting the beginning of the book of Ruth. As I mentioned a minute ago, but I forgot to hit record. It's in a Hebrew tradition of, and I don't know how to say the Hebrew word, but chesed, chesed, which is loyalty or faithfulness arising from commitment. It could be commitment between people. It could be commitment between people and God. So it's a lovely story. It's a lovely story. The other thing I mentioned is that tends to be, I don't know if it's not controversial, tends to be talked about a lot, is the phrase, what does it mean to uncover his feet? So when we come to that point, we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll go ahead and start to read. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Quick setup. We get the situation. I wish it had said how they died, because Moab is another country they left. It's it's kind of, well, it's important to know that they're from Bethlehem too, because it's in the line of Jesus and David. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you find security, each of you in the house of your husband. Then she kissed them and they wept aloud. They said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have my sons in my womb? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Before I read this next part, I want to say it's important. Oh, Cindy's here. Hi, Cindy. Hi, Cindy.
Good morning.
Hello.
So
Good to see you.
I want you to understand why some of this is very, very significant. Do you remember that Jesus always talks about orphans and widows, right? Well, why orphans and widows? Why does he talk about orphans and widows? Because a widow had no way of having a household. So if this sounds horrible, and this is true, if there's a married couple and the man dies, that property falls to his male relative.
Mm-hmm.
And she may or may not be included in that. She is supposed to be the responsibility of that relative also, but very often they didn't care. So they would kick out the widow, and the widow would be on the street, even though that had been her home. Because it would cost more to feed that extra person and all that. So widows were often sort of abandoned, sort of neglected. And so we have the worst case scenario. We have a woman who comes to a foreign land with her husband and 2 sons, loses her husband, loses her 2 sons. Now you have 3 widows who literally have no home, apparently. So it's a worst case scenario. There's no one who no one who could take in Naomi because her family's not even there. And the family of the two daughters could go back to, they can't go to their husband's family. They maybe go back to their family and hope that they would let them in for shelter and food. So it's not just, it's so patriarchal that it goes beyond, you know, if you're a widow, there was no, you know, you had to hope that someone would take care of you.
Oh, get down.
So
Lay down.
they're in more dire circumstance than it may seem at first. So we're in verse 15.
Outside.
So she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law.
Lay down.
But Ruth said, do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Honestly, one of the most lovely parts of this whole book.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge.
It shows what a beautiful person Naomi must have been to have had that kind of loyalty to her daughters-in-law, and the fact that Naomi must have been thoroughly educated in the Jewish traditions and customs and taught them about God.
Yeah, for sure. And just the amazing like loyalty of Ruth too. What do you say, Judy?
I'm trying to figure out why I can't hear right, and I didn't put my hearing aids in.
Oh,
Disappear for a minute and get them.
Good morning, Judy. Good morning.
my coffee maker didn't work this morning, and she didn't put in her hearing aids. We're in bad shape. What do you say, Cindy? What do you say, Cindy?
I didn't put my in either, but I can turn the volume up on my phone so I can hear.
I will read this next part while we're so the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the woman said, is this Naomi? She said to them, call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitterness. The Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with from the country of Moab, came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So her Naomi means pleasant. The name Naomi means pleasant, but Mara means bitter. Don't call me pleasant anymore, call me bitter. So she is back in the Bethlehem where she had left with her husband some time before. Okay.
Can I ask you a quick question? Because I missed something earlier.
Yeah.
You said something about Naomi or Ruth, where she was from. And is she an Israelite or
No.
neither of the
She is from Ruth is from Moab, another country.
okay. And what about
Naomi?
yeah.
Naomi is an Israelite from Bethlehem. So Naomi left with her husband and two sons to Moab.
Right.
Her sons married Ruth and Orpah.
Orpah. Okay. So
the three men died, and Orpah stayed with her people, and Ruth returns with.
Okay.
Naomi.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we're the beginning of chapter 2. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So Elimelech was her husband, right? And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor. She said to her, go, my daughter. So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. So just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. They answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his servant who was in charge of the reapers, to whom does this young woman belong? The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather along the sheaves behind the reapers. So she came and has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even a moment. So do you know what gleaning is?
Picking up the stuff that they
Leaving
didn't,
behind.
yeah. they
So
didn't-
there are gleaning projects in different places where in bigger cities where there's a homeless shelter, they'll go through and glean in the fields to have some extra produce to give to people.
Mhm.
Whatever is left behind by the people that are
I wonder why they left it behind. Is it was because it was tedious to pick it up, or not out of the goodness of their hearts?
it depends. I mean, the goal is to get all of the produce, right?
Yeah,
But they go pretty fast, and so sometimes they miss things.
okay.
But
drop them.
also it could be, and this has been a conversation with this book in particular, it could be that some was left behind intentionally for the poor,
Yeah, okay.
that they left behind 10% of the produce so that the poor could
Ah, okay.
in either case it's kind of a form of charity, either that people are allowed to glean or that they leave some behind as a form of charity. But remember, essentially, even though Naomi's back in the town where her family is from, her husband's family is from, they're basically homeless,
Yeah,
right? So Ruth is gleaning. Now she has more than one purpose. Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor.
okay.
She's hoping to
Her husband,
she's hoping to find another husband, right? So she says, please let me glean and gather these behind the reapers. And it's barley, so it's grain. Then Boaz says to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. So she's actually he's giving her a little bit more
Freedom?
permission than others, right? Then she fell prostrate with her face to the ground and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. Then she said, may I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants. So, she is a little surprised. Not only is she essentially homeless, but she's also a foreign homeless person.
mhm.
And usually Israelites didn't take too kindly to the foreigners doing this sort of thing, right? So, but he knew about her story. He knew about Ruth taking care of her mother-in-law, he said, and following her to be there to help her. So he's a little extra kind to her, basically.
And well, even though all this sounds romantic, it shows the kind of character that Boaz had, that he would extend this courtesy.
I would say it's not romantic. It's intentionally not romantic yet. Remember at the beginning, he says, my daughter.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Right. So it's not so much that although Boaz and Naomi are related by marriage, it's more of a familial kind of a thing, a protective kind of comment. Don't worry, I'm going to take care of you, just by saying my daughter, right? So that's the first thing he says to her. So
Mhm.
it's kind of now it's not romantic yet, kind
Yeah,
of intentionally.
right.
Um, he wants to take care of her because she has taken care of
His relative.
his relatives. Yeah. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some of this bread and dip your morsel in the sour wine." So she sat beside the reapers and heaped up for her some parched grain. She ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she got up to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, "Let her glean even among the standing sheaves. Do not reproach her. You must also pull out some handfuls for her from the bundles and leave them for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So not now she's not just getting the leftovers, she's being able to go out ahead of them and take what she wants,
Mhm.
essentially. And they're even pulling some to give to her. So not only is she getting what she wants, but she's getting extra.
Yeah. He's been very nice.
Yeah. So she gleaned in the field until evening, and she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. I don't know how much an ephah is. 2/3 of a bushel, a substantial amount for one day's gleaning.
Mhm. Yeah,
She picked it up and came into the town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gleaned. Then she took out and gave her what was left over after she herself had been satisfied. Her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today, and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, "The name of the man with whom I work today is Boaz." Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "Blessed is he by the Lord, whose kindness had not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "This man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay close by my servants until they have finished all my harvest.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It is better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, otherwise you might be bothered in another field." So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
okay. My version says not just kinsman, but kinsman redeemer,
Oh,
which,
wow.
which points back up to that tradition that you explained earlier.
The other thing that should, I don't know if maybe concern you, notice in verse 22, "It's better, my daughter, you should go out with his young men, otherwise you might be bothered in another field."
Mhm.
Not only is she a foreigner, but a woman on her own, a single woman. She has, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but she has no value. So if someone were to say, "What are you doing in our field?" they could kill her, and they wouldn't even be,
Yeah.
there would be nothing would happen to them.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, several different things could have happened to her.
Right.
All kinds of mayhem.
She could be raped. There's all sorts of things. So when he says, "Stay in my field," he's not just saying, "You can have my barley, but I'm going to make sure that you're safe," which is
Yeah.
the big thing for a woman in her position.
Yeah.
So it sort of sets us up. You know what? We probably have time to read the whole book. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, I need you to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you. And here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to him, "All that you tell me, I will do." So here we come to the uncovering of the feet.
Yep.
So there's largely two schools of interpretation here.
Yes.
One school of interpretation is that the uncovering of feet is a euphemism for sexual acts. So go and perform sexual acts with him.
Mm.
A lot of people think that's probably it might have been used that way, but it not necessarily may. At the more sort of genteel way is that it is a way of her telling him that she is available for marriage
Mm.
so
Mhm.
either
That makes
way
sense.
it's making a move on him,
Mm-hmm.
whichever it is. It's telling him that she would like to be his wife.
Mm. Okay.
However, they're interpreted both ways. She
I like the
actually,
second way.
yes,
Yeah, I looked it up on the internet and I saw that both said, but I think that it's the second one that she's submitting to the traditions and reminding Boaz of his obligation to be her kinsman redeemer.
yeah. It's I tend to lean toward the second, but there are people that will say that she wasn't literally uncovering his feet; she was doing something for him.
Yeah.
And so, but to me, it doesn't matter which one it is, because she, it was not. It was her. The only way that she could tell him that she had an interest in him was through this. You can't just say I have interest in you. That kind of forwardness would not have been acceptable in that culture.
Mhm.
So whether she literally just uncovered his feet and laid at his feet, which would have said, I am yours, I'm willing to be yours, or something a little bit more sexual. Either way, it was meant to be all that a woman could do to indicate that they were interested in the man, essentially.
Yeah. In the fact that she was instructed by Naomi to stay at his feet
Yes,
and not anywhere else.
right. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk and he was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily, I love that, and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. For all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good. Let him do it. If he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until morning." What about this next of kin thing?
Yeah.
Okay, my
That's
Bible
what we-
literally says, but if he is not willing, then as surely as the Lord lives, I will marry you. Now lie down here until morning.
So essentially, there is
Before we get to that one, this lying down at his feet, could it be that this is her way of saying, thank you, I am your servant, whatever?
I would say yes, but it goes a little past that. It's more than just that, right? It is thank you, but it's also saying I want to be part of your household, right? And I think, I mean, it's not too much to say that she is indicating an openness to a romantic connection with him, right? To be his wife by doing this. It is a thank you, but it's more than that. It's saying I am your servant,
Yes,
but
I need like kneeling.
yeah, but that carries a little bit more weight in this particular way, too. More than just your servant, right? So this is actually something that I think says a lot about Boaz's character. that remember if a man dies, the law states that his nearest male relative has to take care of his widow.
Mhm.
So, but Naomi was gone. So when Naomi was not in the land anymore, when her husband died, so there was no near male relative to take care of Naomi. That also would extend to Naomi's sons and daughters-in-law, right? So Boaz could just take Ruth as his wife, but he knows the law that someone else's responsibility first.
Mm.
The next of kin, we say that word in modern day too, but the next of kin is the next in line who has rights to take care of you, but also to your property, things like that, right? So the next of kin is an important term here, right? So he says, hold on, I don't want to jump the line. Someone else has rights to marry you first. And I think it says that Boaz was a very, honest person. Um, so then it says, so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. For he said, it must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.
Hmm.
Then he said, bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back. Then he went into the city. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, how did things go with you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.
Hmm.
So backing up, I just noticed, spread your cloak. Ruth is, so spread your cloak over me. Ruth is asking for marriage. Spreading a garment over a woman signifies acquiring her.
Hmm.
But he refuses to do that, which is interesting, right? Because of not having the first claim on her. So it says that someone had a claim on her. It doesn't mean that someone says, hey, I'm interested in Ruth. It means that someone by the connection, the closest relative to Naomi's husband would have the next claim.
But there's a bit of, I think, as I read in my edition, the problem is there's a bit of property still involved that would belong to Elimelech before he went to Moab.
Yeah, well, we'll that'll come up in this next chapter.
Yep, that comes up in the next chapter.
So it's sort of a weird, it's an interesting system, that he left presumably without property, but if someone died that it would have fallen to him, then he would have property again even after he's dead. And who owns the property now when he's dead? And there's no man in that side of the family, so it can be a little complicated. So that's what we're going to hear here. No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin of whom Boaz had spoken came passing by. So Boaz said, come over, friend, sit down here. And he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took the 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. He then said to the next of kin, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me so that I may know. For there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you. So he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also crying Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance. At this, the next of kin said, I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance.
Hmm.
Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Probably some explanation here. So, they want to keep the land in the family. We don't know how Naomi holds this piece of property, but a woman cannot own property.
Mhm.
So you would seem, well, she's homeless. Can't she just own it on her own? The answer is generally no. So it may be up for sale, or has been sold or will be sold, because no relative of her husband has claimed it. But, and this is horrible, I know the way this sounds, the people who own, the women who are connected to the property are the property of are connected with the property.
Yeah,
So if the next of kin is going to buy the property, going to take possession of the property, he has to take possession of Ruth and Naomi also. That's how it
both
works.
of them, both of them.
Both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then when the next of kin heard this, he said, hold on, I don't know that I can do that, right?
Yeah.
Is, um,
And also, doesn't that property remain in Emily's, any children that Ruth might have had by that man, that property would go down to them instead of the kinsman redeemer.
yeah, it gets a little muddy because we don't have any indication that Ruth had children. We assume that she didn't. But if Ruth had a male child, let's pretend this whole story, Ruth is traveling with Naomi and her male and her son, Ruth's son. Technically, the property would fall to the boy. Then this gets really messy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, but there's not a son, right? So the women, if the women weren't there, let's say the women never came back from Moab, then that property would go to the next of kin. He would buy it, it would be settled, and that would be it.
Hmm.
But with Naomi and Ruth there, it makes it more complicated, right? So essentially the next of kin didn't want to take the property because it would also meant taking care of Ruth. The responsibility of taking care of Ruth and Naomi would fall to him too.
Yeah,
He said something about without damaging my own inheritance. I think that meant his own wealth, because he may not have a lot and now he has to feed 2 more people.
yeah,
He's not saying his inheritance going down through the generations. He's talking about his actual, I don't know that I could, having to feed them might mean nothing for my children down the road, right? So I cannot redeem it. So it was a smart thing of Boaz to do it in front of a bunch of witnesses, right?
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Because what could have happened was the guy says, yeah, I'll buy it. And then his responsibility is to Ruth and Naomi, but then he decides not to take care of Ruth and Naomi. And Ruth and Naomi have no legal way to be taken care of, right? So there's lots of witnesses that say, okay, cool, you'll buy the land, then you're taking Naomi and Ruth too,
Yeah, yeah,
in front of 10 witnesses. And the guy looks at the witnesses and says, oh, well, now if they're not taken care of, I'm in trouble,
yeah,
because I just promised that I would take care of them if I bought this land.
yeah.
So Boaz sort of, it was a smart move for Boaz. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He made sure that whatever happened, that essentially, even if the man had agreed, that Ruth and Naomi were going to be taken care of, which is kind of amazing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this was a custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This is the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, acquire it for yourself, he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. That's the sons, right? I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses. So the line of people could be it's interesting, right? The line of Elimelech is sort of jumping from one line in the back. It's as if it is. So if Ruth and Boaz have a son, it is essentially still Elimelech's grandson, even though it's not Elimelech's grandson. Right, is what they're saying,
Yeah.
which is good. Boaz is saying it will stay in Elimelech's line,
Yeah.
right? Which is, even though technically it won't be bio, they didn't care about genetics.
Yeah.
It's not
No.
genetically his grandson. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's his son's widows, would be his son's widow's children. So it's also, again, sort of a nice gesture of Boaz in a way. Where I forget where I am now.
Verse 11.
Then 11. Then
11.
all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So I have a thing here, a note. Well, it's come from a little later. A son has been born to Naomi, which will happen later. Not a biological son or even biological grandson, but a son, in that he replaces the family that Naomi has lost. It's sort of that Boaz is allowing the line of Elimelech to have heirs again, essentially, which is kind of neat. This is important, the very important point right here, this last little section. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Aminadab, Aminadab of Nahshon, Nahshon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, Obed of Jesse, and Jesse of David.
Hmm.
So this is also the line of Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting that the line almost died. The line of Jesus almost died, could have died, right? But through this sort of amazing story, it did not.
Mhm. And Ruth, of course, is only one of 4 women in the genealogy of Jesus in the first chapter of Matthew.
Right, and interesting too that Ruth is a foreigner.
Right. And only one of those 4 women was a Jewish woman.
I didn't even know that.
Girl.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that. That's awesome. That's neat.
Yeah, because Rahab was a foreigner,
Right.
and she's in there. And then
Right.
Bathsheba, she may have been Jewish, but she was the adulteress.
Right.
Ruth was the foreigner, and Mary was a peasant girl.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, interesting, wonderful story. Any further
So I
thoughts?
raised my question: who is the real heroine in this story, Ruth or Naomi?
I mean, I think they both have. I mean, Naomi was the one who came up with the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that she remembered her raising, her roots, and she must have been a very godly woman
Mhm.
to have remembered to go back there, and the fact then that Ruth followed her, of course, in no way subtracts from her devotion to Naomi, but Naomi must have been a super woman to have inspired Ruth to go back with her.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you read if you look at the story, Naomi is the one who, I mean, does Ruth marry Boaz unless Naomi sort of suggests it? Essentially, Naomi says twice, right? It happens twice. Naomi says, go to the fields and maybe you can find a man. Glean and maybe find a man. And then when Boaz meets Ruth, Naomi then says, all right, now go back to the threshing floor and lay at his feet and
Yeah.
express an interest in him, right? Naomi sort of restores her own familial line or that of her husband. So although Ruth takes some risk herself, but it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
There are a lot of cultural things sort of embedded in about how you acquire property, about the fact that women cannot own property. So there's some interesting things there. That's very much a cultural thing. You have to understand some of the cultural nuances to understand the story, and not just the uncovering the feet. I mean, the other stuff too. Like what happens when to widows is an important part of this story, right? How are widows taken care of? Are they taken care of? Is an important part of this story.
You would not know.
Yeah.
And why things happen the way they did.
If you read it with a modern context, you'd be like, well, why can't Naomi and Ruth just live as widows on the property? But that's not how it works. They can't.
Yeah.
So then you have to figure out, and this idea. Here's an interesting question. That is a side question, but it's kind of important to the thing. Does the next of kin who's never named or Boaz have a wife already?
We don't know.
He may have,
They could.
Mhm.
and he may have had
The
children.
answer is they could. The reason I bring that up is it's something else that doesn't make sense in our culture. Well, if a man dies, his wife is supposed to be married by his next of kin. It's supposed to be taken care of by his next of kin. Oftentimes that would involve marriage. Well, if he already has a wife, that's irrelevant, right?
Mhm.
He would have the rights to not only the duty to protect her, but the rights to her as if she was property. So you could have multiple wives, and happen very, very often. So there's no mention of it. Boaz is mentioned as being older than Ruth, a lot older than Ruth, which if he's older than Ruth at all and she's already been married, that he may be a widower himself. We don't really know. He may have a wife already. We don't know. These are all like when women came with the property like that, it was a common occurrence that you would have multiple wives.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's something that doesn't jibe with our. We was like, well, how would that work? I'm like, it's not our culture.
Yeah. And the fact that the property that Ruth and Naomi brought to him belongs to Obed, and he probably was not threatened by the fact that that property would damage the estate of any heirs he may have already have.
Right. Well, thank you all for coming
Okay.
today. As I said earlier, I don't know if everybody heard it. I